The composition of corporation.
Incorporators. 1 to 15 natural persons or juridical persons can already form a corporation for as long as they will have a share in the shares of stock of the corporation to be formed. Incorporators are those stockholders or members mentioned in the articles of incorporation as originally forming and composing the corporation and who are signatories of the articles of incorporation.
Promoters. Promoters are those responsible for bringing about the formation of a corporation. They may or may not assume the status of incorporators later on. Stockholders, in case of stock corporation, or members, in case of non-stock corporation, are considered corporators. Corporators may either be stockholders or members depending on whether it is stock or non-stock corporation.
Who are those in charge in the management of the corporation? We have the board of directors in case of stock corporation and the board of trustees in case of non-stock corporation. The stockholders or shareholders are the ones who elect the members of the board of directors. Then the board of directors will elect the corporate officers. On the other way around, the members of a non-stock corporation are the ones who elect the board of trustees. And the board of trustees are the ones who will elect the corporate officers of a non-stock corpo.
Under the present law, for corporations vested with public interest, these corporations are already required to have independent directors. How can we consider a director an independent director? The law is silent, but with reference to SEC Memorandum Circular Number 6, Series of 2009, an independent director should maintain the equity of only 2%. And there must be independent directors who are at least 20% of the members of the board of directors, but should not be less than 2, with reference to the Code of Corporate Governance. What are corporations vested with public interest? First, corporations listed with an exchange. These are publicly listed companies, or those corporations with assets of at least 50 million pesos and having 200 or more holders of shares, each holding at least 100 shares of a class of its equity shares. What else? Banks, quasi-banks, non-stock savings and loan associations, pawn shops, corporations engaged in money service business, pre-need, trust, and insurance companies, and other financial intermediaries, as well as those other corporations vested with public interest by virtue of the special laws. Under Batasang Pambansa bilang 68, the term for members of the board is 1 year. But under RA 11232, the term for directors is 1 year, and for trustees, 3 years, subject to the principle of holdover, which means that until their successors have been elected. Now, the right to vote by directors or officers, or even by stockholders or members. Now, the voting may now be done by remote communication or in absentia, for as long as it is adopted and provided for in the bylaws. When we say remote communication or in absentia, by video conference or teleconference. And remember that those who participate via remote communication or in absentia will be considered present for purposes of quorum. In the election of the board of directors or trustees, there must be a meeting. The meeting by the stockholders or the members. It is either in person or through a representative with a written proxy. Now, that means authority. Or through remote communication or via absentia if it is acceptable or authorized in the bylaws. For stock corporation, members of the board of directors will be elected by owners of majority of the outstanding capital stock. For non-stock corporation, the members of the board of trustees are to be elected by majority of the members. Disqualification of directors, trustees, or officers. Remember that for directors or trustees, they must be a stockholder or a member. Now, if within a period of 5 years prior to election, the person was convicted by final judgment of an offense, punishable by imprisonment for a period exceeding 6 years. These correspond with prisión mayor, reclusión temporal, or reclusión perpetua. Number 2, for violating the corporation code. And number 3, for violating the Securities and Regulations Code. Say, guilty for insider trading or investment fraud. That will fall under number 3. If this is within the period of 5 years prior to election. And remember, there must be conviction by final judgment. Also, if within 5 years prior to election, the person was found administratively liable for any offense involving fraudulent acts, say estafa, or by foreign court or equivalent foreign regulatory authority for acts, violations, or misconduct similar to those enumerated in paragraph A and paragraph B.
Question. At the annual meeting of ABC Corporation, for the election of 5 directors, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G were nominated. How many were nominated? 7 were nominated. A, B, C, D, and E received the highest number of votes and proclaimed elected. F received 10 votes less than E. Subsequently, E sold his shares to F, who between E and F has the right to attend as director in the board meeting. The transfer of shares having been registered with the corporation. Remember that it is a requirement that for one to have a seat in the members of the board of directors, he must own at least 1 share of stock. And if the director subsequently sold or disposed, conveyed his shares of stock, he loses his position, and that is a disqualification. Therefore, E cannot have a seat in the members of the board of directors. Neither F, because he was not elected by the stockholders. Our answer?
D. Neither of them shall be director.
Let us have this problem. ABCDE Corporation has authorized capital stock of 5 million with 50,000 shares at par value of 100 pesos per share. The 30,000 shares were subscribed by the following. We have A for 5,000 shares, B 5,000 shares, C 10,000 shares, D 6,000 shares, and E 4,000 shares for a total of 30,000 shares. Question. Compute for the majority of outstanding capital stock. What do we mean by majority of outstanding capital stock? Now, we consider the capital or the equity. 30,000 shares. 30,000 shares total subscription. The outstanding capital stock exclude the treasury shares. We will assume in this problem that the subscribed are all considered as outstanding capital stock. 30,000 shares divided by 2, 15,000 shares plus 1. That means 15,000 and 1 shares considered as majority of the outstanding capital stock. As simple as when we say majority, you divide. You divide the total number of equity or outstanding capital stock in this case by 2 plus 1. Letter B. If A, B, and D personally attended the meeting for the election of the board of directors and stockholder E through video teleconference. If they elected A and B to be the corporation's directors, would their election be considered valid? Now let us try to look at if their votes considered as majority of the outstanding capital stock. Now, in this case, a stockholder can cast votes depending on his equity, depending on the number of shares that he owns, multiplied by the number of the vacancy. But at any rate, we have 2 vacancies. Granting that we have 2 vacancies, let us try to look at the number of shares. If it is already more than 50%, then that can be considered as majority. And those who are elected by the majority can be considered validly elected. Now, for A, we have 5,000 shares. B, 5,000 shares. And D, 6,000 shares. Remember that A, B, and D personally attended the meeting of the stockholders for the election of the vacancy. A total of 16,000 shares. And 16,000 shares multiplied by 2 vacancies, then therefore we have 32,000 shares. And that already constitutes as a majority. Now, at any rate, also consider the attendance of stockholder E through video conference. Those who attended via video conference or in absentia for as long as it is allowed in the bylaws, they are likewise constitute as part of the quorum. Although the problem is silent that it did not provide on whether video teleconference is allowed in the bylaws, by assumption, we can likewise adopt the same. At any rate, even in the absence of stockholder E, which owns 4,000 shares, the votes of A, B, and D already constitute majority of the outstanding capital stock. Therefore, the election of A and B is valid.
A stockholder or member who participates through remote communication or in absentia shall be deemed present for purposes of quorum. The election must be by ballot if it is requested by any voting stockholder or member. In case of non-stock corporation, a member may cast as many votes as there are trustees to be elected, but may not cast more than one vote for one candidate. Election of the board of directors. The stockholders may cast their vote by straight voting, cumulative voting in favor of one candidate, or cumulative voting by distribution. What is straight voting? A stockholder may vote such number of shares for as many persons as there are directors to be elected. Cumulative voting in favor of one candidate. A stockholder may accumulate said shares and give one candidate as many votes as the number of directors to be elected, multiplied by the number of his shares shall equal. Cumulative voting by distribution. A stockholder may distribute them on the same principle among as many candidates as he shall see fit. In the following slide, we will illustrate straight voting, cumulative voting in favor of one candidate, and cumulative voting by distribution.
Illustration. ABCDE Corporation has authorized capital stock of 5 million with 50,000 shares at par value of 100 pesos per share. The 30,000 shares were subscribed by the following: A for 5,000 shares, B 5,000 shares, C 10,000 shares, D 6,000 shares, and E 4,000 shares. Total 30,000 shares. Question: if the Articles of Incorporation provides for 2 directors and the term of the Board of Directors has expired, how many votes can be cast? A stockholder can cast the number of votes based on the number of shares that he owned multiplied by the number of vacancy. In this case, D owns 6,000 shares. And there are 2 directors to be elected. 6,000 shares multiplied by 2, 12,000 votes. D can cast 12,000 votes. He can cast this by straight voting, cumulative voting in favor of one candidate, or cumulative voting by distribution. If A, B, C, and D were nominated for membership in the board, say A would cast his vote. Illustrate cumulative distribution. Now let us compare the 3. First, straight voting. Straight voting is equal. Now if A would like to cast his vote, A has 5,000 shares multiplied by 2, 10,000 votes. 10,000 votes can be cast by A in favor of his chosen nominees. Say he chose A and B. He can cast 5,000 votes for himself and 5,000 votes for B. Now, that means straight voting merely says that we are casting our vote equally to our chosen nominees. Cumulative voting by distribution. Cumulative voting by distribution, if A is entitled to 10,000 votes, A can cast the votes, not necessarily equal. It is by distribution. A would cast his vote, say, 7,000 votes for himself and 3,000 votes for B. That is cumulative voting by distribution. How about cumulative voting in favor of one candidate? If A owns 5,000 shares and there are 2 vacancies, 10,000 shares, or 10,000 votes, he can cast the 10,000 votes in his favor, in favor only of one candidate. Now, the cumulative voting by or in favor of one candidate is being utilized by the minority stockholders to have or to elect their representative in the members of the board of directors. Another question. S is the registered owner of 500 shares of stock of XYZ Corporation, whose articles of incorporation provide for 11 directors. In the annual election of directors for 2011, 12 stockholders filed their certificates of candidacy for the position, namely A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and L. K and L are minority stockholders whom S wishes to elect to represent him and the other minority stockholders in the board. In the said election of directors, S may cast a maximum of, remember that a stockholder can cast his votes based on the number of shares that he owns multiplied by the number of vacancy. If we have 500 shares of stock owned by S, and there are 11 directors to be elected, S is entitled to 5,500 votes.
Our answer, letter C, 5,500 votes.
Illustration for non-stock corporation. Charity Works Inc. is a non-stock corporation, and its articles of incorporation provides for 5 seats in the Board of Trustees. Alex, Bert, Carlos, Danilo, Edna, Francis, Jerry, and Hilda are members of the corporation. How many votes can Danilo cast? A member of a non-stock corporation is entitled to the number of votes depending on the number of vacancy in the Board of Trustees. Since there are 5 seats in the Board of Trustees, Danilo is entitled to 5 votes, but he can only cast 1 vote for his chosen nominee.
Majorical persons vote. Our answer, yes. But since it can act only through natural persons, it has to appoint its representatives or proxies. May the proxy of juridical persons become directors or trustees? No, unless the proxy is by himself qualified to be a director or trustee. Requirement under Section 25 of RA 11232. Upon election, 30 days therefrom, submit report to SEC indicating the names, nationalities, shareholdings, and residence addresses of the directors, trustees, and officers elected. In case of non-holding of election, the reasons shall be reported. The report shall specify the new date for the election, which shall not be later than 60 days from the scheduled date. In case of failure of election, SEC upon application and verification shall summarily issue an order that an election be held. Upon death, resignation, or a director, trustee, or officer cease to hold office, within 7 days from knowledge, the corporate secretary or representative of the corporation shall submit a report to the Securities and Exchange Commission.